The factory staged a fake divorce for housing allocation, and I believed Lee Jun's lies. When I heard those words, I cried my heart out, kneeling and begging them not to tear my family apart. In this life, I picked up the pen and smiled. All right, I'll sign. The expressions of everyone present dropped, but they didn't know that in my previous life I had waited for Gu Beizheng in an empty room for 30 years, my hair turning white, my tears drying up, and finally dying alone in that ice-cold room in the military family compound. In this lifetime, whoever wants to be the commander's wife can be. Yeah, I'll live for myself. I opened my eyes on a hospital bed. To be precise, it was a ward of the Military Region General Hospital. The pungent smell of disinfectant filled my nostrils, and the fluorescent lights on the ceiling made my vision blur for a moment. I was stunned for 3 seconds because this ceiling, this smell, this bed, I was all too familiar with them. In my previous life I had stayed in this hospital countless times. The first time was a miscarriage, the second was a gastric hemorrhage, and the third was a heart attack. Each time the chair beside the hospital bed was empty. Gu Beizheng had never come, not once. You're awake. A woman in a gray-blue uniform pushed the door open and entered. Her name was Political Commissar He, the Deputy Director of the Military Region's Political Department. I knew her. In my previous life, it was she who came to me with that divorce agreement. It was the winter of 1978. I glanced at the calendar on the bedside table, December 16, 1978. My hands suddenly clenched the corner of the blanket. I really came back. Political Commissar He sat down by the bedside, a troubled expression on her face. She pulled a document out of her briefcase and placed it in front of me. I looked down. Divorce agreement. Party A, Gu Beizheng. Party B, Xia Shiwan. Political Commissar He carefully chose her words. This matter has been thoroughly considered by the organization. Commander Gu is about to be dispatched to the border to carry out a long-term special mission involving highly classified information. From a security perspective, the organization believes that. She paused. Temporarily dissolving your marriage is for the best for both parties. In my previous life, when I heard those words, my entire body trembled. I clutched Political Commissar He's hand tightly and asked her, did I do something wrong? Does Beijing not want me anymore? I cried so hard I couldn't catch my breath. I knelt on the ground and begged her, saying I could wait, no matter how long. In the end, I didn't sign. But so what? Gu Beizheng still left. He was gone for 30 years. For 30 years, I fulfilled his filial duties to his parents and held the entire family together on his behalf. His mother, Song Yunhua, looked down on my background, calling me a country bumpkin from the countryside. His sister, Gu Shulan, came by every few days to take things from the house, meat from the fridge, cloth coupons from the cabinet, and the industrial coupons I had saved up for half a year. Even after taking everything, she still complained that I was stingy. I endured it because I thought that once Gu Beizheng returned, everything would be fine. But did he ever come back? Family leave, 7 days in total. During those 7 days, he stayed at home for 2 days and spent the remaining 5 at the military unit. He didn't talk much to me during those 2 days either. At night, he slept with his back to me, breathing steadily. I stared at his back, wanting to tell him about the grievances of these years. I opened my mouth, but not a single word came out. Because I was afraid he would find me annoying, afraid he would think I wasn't strong enough to be a military wife. Later, he left again. After that, he was promoted to commander. Much later, I heard there was a female staff officer by his side named Lu Ningqing, young and beautiful, accompanying him in and out of various occasions. By then, I was already in my 50s, with graying hair and a back that could no longer straighten. I didn't make a scene. I didn't dare to. I just sat alone in the courtyard, gazing at the pomegranate tree we had planted on our wedding day. Recalling the words he had spoken to me back then, "See, when I come back from the war, I'll take you to see the sea." He never took me to see the sea. The day I died, it was a bright, sunny day. Our neighbor, Sister Xiao, found me collapsed in the kitchen, still clutching half a peeled potato in my hand. It was already too late by the time I was taken to the hospital, a cerebral hemorrhage. I heard that Gu Beijing was silent for a long time after receiving the news. I heard that he stood for a long time at my funeral. I heard he said, "I owe her." But so what? She was already dead, it was too late to say anything now. So in this life, when political commissar he placed that divorce agreement in front of me, I didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't utter a single unnecessary word. I sat up and took the fountain pen from her hand. Political commissar he was stunned. "You can take your time to think this over." "No need to think about it." I opened the agreement, flipped to the last page, and wrote 3 words on the Party B signature line, Xia Shiwan. Political commissar he's mouth opened, then closed again. She clearly didn't expect this outcome. "Are you sure?" I handed the pen back to her and smiled. "Sure." Political commissar he stared at those 3 words for a long time, her expression shifting several times. She probably thought I would react the same way as last time, crying and bleeding, refusing to agree no matter what. After all, in everyone's eyes, Xia Shiwan's greatest value was being Gu Beijing's wife. Divorced, I was nothing. But they didn't know that in my past life, before marrying Gu Beijing, I was the top student in the surgery department of the provincial medical college. My mentor, Professor Zhang Henian, was a top-tier cardiac surgeon in the country. He said I was the most talented student he had ever seen and that I would surely become a top surgeon in the future. But I gave up everything for Gu Beijing, dropping out, getting married, and following the army. I had lived as nothing more than an appendage. In this life, I would not make the same mistake again. Political commissar he put away the signed agreement, stood up, and glanced back at me. "Xia Shiwan, don't be too upset about signing. The organization will take care of you." "Thank you, political commissar he. No need to take care of me." I threw off the covers, got out of bed, put on my cotton shoes, and walked over to the window. Outside the window were the plane trees of the military compound, their bare branches swaying back and forth in the winter wind. In my past life, I stared at these trees and waited for 30 years. In this life, I would walk out of this courtyard. Less than half an hour after political commissar he left, the door was pushed open. I also recognized the person who came, Song Yunhua, Gu Beijing's mother, my former mother-in-law. She was wearing a dark navy blue cotton-padded jacket, her hair meticulously combed, and the expression on her face was neither clearly happy nor disdainful. But I knew she was happy, because she never liked me. "I heard you signed." Song Yunhua sat down in the chair, crossing her legs. "That was quicker than I expected." I said nothing. "Good." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket, unfolded it, and placed it on the table. "Since we're divorced, there are some things we need to make clear." I glanced at the paper. A list was written above. The house in the family compound belongs to the Gu family. The family savings, 320 yuan, belonged to the Gu family. The sewing machine, bicycle, and radio, the three major items, belonged to the Gu family. The pair of mahogany trunks I brought as my dowry when I got married also belonged to the Gu family. At the end, a line was added, Xia Shiwan's personal belongings to be taken away by herself. I finished reading and looked up at her. Song Yunhua put on an air of authority. I won't bully you, you can take your clothes and books. Don't even think about taking anything else in the house. They were all bought with Beijing's allowance. In my previous life, I never saw this list, because in my previous life, I didn't sign it. I kept living in that apartment, even though that home was never warm. But if I had signed, Song Yunhua would probably have brought out something similar. In my previous life, I would have definitely cried and argued, we had nothing when we got married, I bought this sewing machine with my own savings, and half of the savings came from my salary. But in this life, all right. I nodded. Song Yunhua was taken aback, she seemed not to have expected me to be so straightforward. You agreed. You're right about everything. I walked over to the bedside and opened the cloth bag. Inside were the change of clothes I had brought when I was hospitalized. I folded them one by one and packed them inside. I don't want any of those things anymore, not even the house. I picked up my cloth bag and walked toward the door. As I passed by Song Yunhua, I stopped. Comrade Song, there's something I've been holding back for a long time. I looked into her eyes. Your son knows me, and he won't be able to repay it in this lifetime. Song Yunhua's face changed color. What do you mean? Divorced and still trying to cling to the Gu family. I smiled slightly, didn't answer, and pushed the door open to walk out. At the end of the corridor, I ran into someone coming the other way, tall, beautiful, wearing a well-fitted military uniform with a second lieutenant insignia pinned to her collar. Lu Ningqing, the female advisor rumored to be by Gu Beijing's side in the previous life. In this life, I finally saw her face clearly at this point in time. She stood in the corridor holding a bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums, her expression very copied. Oh, no, very complex. Are you Sister Xia? Her voice was soft, carrying a deliberate fragility. I heard you were unwell and hospitalized, so I came to see you. Yellow chrysanthemums, bringing yellow chrysanthemums to visit a patient. Is this flower meant for visiting a patient? I looked at the bouquet of flowers in her hand, then at the carefully crafted concern on her face. In my past life, I didn't know her. By the time I learned her name, I was already in my 50s. Back then, someone told me that Lu Ningqing had been serving as an advisor by Gu Beijing's side since she was 18, following him all the way from the regimental headquarters to the military district. Her father, Lu Zhenkuan, was Gu Beijing's former superior. Her background, her abilities, and her age were all more suitable than mine. I once thought that the so-called organizationally arranged divorce was truly just a work requirement. But in my previous life, just before I passed away, I vaguely overheard Gu Beijing talking on the phone in the hospital corridor. That divorce back then, wasn't it pushed behind the scenes by Lu Ningqing? She had someone file a report up the chain. My mom also helped. I didn't hear the rest because I was already close to death at that time, but I remembered very clearly. So now, standing in the hallway, looking at this young and beautiful woman in front of me, catching the fleeting smugness in her eyes, I feel no hatred in my heart, only cold, bitter bone-chilling cold. Thank you for the flowers. I reached out and took the bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums, turned and walked 2 steps, then threw it into the rubbish bin at the end of the hallway. Sorry, I don't like chrysanthemums. Lu Ningqing's expression instantly became extremely colorful, the curve of her lips froze, and a crack appeared in the veil of fragility in her eyes. But she quickly regained her smile. Sister Xia, it's understandable that you're feeling down. After all, divorce is too cruel for a woman. Her voice carried just the right amount of pity. If you ever need any help in the future, don't hesitate to come to me. Although I'm just an adjutant by Commander Gu's side, I still have some say in matters. I understood, I could hear every single word clearly. This was a protest, gentle, dignified, and flawless. No need. I walked past her with my cloth bag in hand. From today onward, Commander Gu has nothing to do with me anymore. I didn't look back, but I knew that behind me, Lu Ningqing must be smiling. She thought she won. But she didn't know that in this game, the loser wouldn't be me. When stepping out of the military hospital gate, the north wind blew straight into my face. In the northern December, the cold could crack a person's bones. I was wearing a thin cotton-padded jacket, carrying a cloth bag, with only 7 yuan and 30 cents in my pocket, along with a pass for the military family compound. Oh, I probably won't need the access pass anymore either. I stood at the hospital entrance for a moment, taking a deep breath of the cold air. My lungs were filled with ice shards, painful, but I remained conscious. The 30 years of the previous life flashed quickly through my mind, endless laundry, endless cooking, endless scrutiny from my mother-in-law, and one new year after another endured alone. It's over, it's all over. In this life, I am going to find someone, Professor Zhang Henian, my esteemed teacher. In the previous life, he was deeply distressed after I dropped out of school and once wrote 3 letters urging me to return and continue my studies. I didn't even reply, because Song Yunhua said, "What's the use of a woman reading so many books? Taking good care of her husband at home is the proper thing to do." I actually believed it. In this life, I will never believe again. I wrapped my cotton-padded jacket tighter and walked toward the bus station. The Provincial Medical College was located in the provincial capital, 300 kilometers away. The long-distance bus ride took hours. 7 yuan and 30 cents, just enough for a one-way ticket. Enough, this road, I only need to walk it once. The long-distance bus jolted along the national highway for a full 6 hours. By the time we arrived in the provincial capital, it was already dark. I stood at the entrance of the bus station, my breath turning into white mist. There was only 1 yuan and 80 cents left in my pocket. The Provincial Medical College was located in the west of the city. It took 40 minutes to walk. I didn't hesitate and walked away. When passing by a pancake stall, my stomach let out a growl. I clutched the money in my pocket and walked over. It's not that I'm not hungry, this 1 yuan and 80 cents. I had other uses for it. 40 minutes later, I stood at the main entrance of the Provincial Medical College. Iron gate, 2 concrete pillars, with a wooden sign hanging above, Provincial Medical College. 5 years, I had been away from here for 5 whole years. The security booth had its light on. I tapped on the window. "Comrade, could you tell me where Professor Zhang's office is?" The security guard was an old man wearing reading glasses. He looked me up and down. "You're looking for Professor Zhang. He's already off work by this hour, come back tomorrow." "Then where does he live now?" "I can't tell you that." "What's your relationship with him?" I thought for a moment. I'm his student, Xia Shiwan. The old man adjusted his glasses and suddenly froze. You're Xia Shiwan, Professor Zhang's student. There was a strange surprise in his tone. Wait a moment, I need to make a phone call. He turned around and dialed a number, speaking a few words into the receiver. After hanging up the phone, he looked at me and shook his head. Professor Zhang said you should go to his place, faculty dormitory, building 3, room 401. The old man paused and added, Young lady, Professor Zhang has been waiting for you for a long time. My nose suddenly felt sore. Professor Zhang's door was not closed. I stood at the doorway, seeing the light inside and a hunched figure. He had aged. 5 years ago, he was still a vigorous middle-aged man, but now his hair was completely white and his back was hunched. He sat at the desk with a worn-out textbook spread open in front of him. Hearing the door, he turned his head. The moment he saw me, his eyes reddened. You, this student of mine, finally remembered me. His voice trembled slightly. I walked in, set down the cloth bundle, and stood still before him. Then I bowed deeply. Teacher Zhang, I'm back. I want to continue my studies, I want to become a surgeon. Zhang Henian looked at me and remained silent for a long time. Finally, he slammed the table hard. You should have come back long ago. He stood up, pulled out a set of medical textbooks from the cabinet, and stacked them in front of me. Starting tomorrow, you'll follow me in the outpatient clinic during the day and catch up on your studies at night. You've fallen behind by 5 years, but your foundation is still there. I'll give you 6 months. He held up one finger. Within 6 months, you must pass all the makeup exams for every subject. Can you do it? I looked at the thick stack of books, but I wasn't afraid. In my previous life, I missed 30 years. In this life, half a year was enough. I can do it. That night, I slept in the guest room of Professor Zhang's house. The blanket was very thin, but I didn't feel cold at all, because there was a fire burning in my heart. This was my first night after being reborn. It was also the beginning of living for myself for the first time in my life. For half a year, I studied like crazy. During the day, I followed Professor Zhang on outpatient visits, ward rounds, and surgical observations. At night, I returned to the dormitory to bury myself in textbooks, take notes, and practice suturing. Professor Zhang found me a vacant student dormitory and helped me arrange an auditing enrollment. There was some gossip on campus. Didn't that Xia Shiwan marry an official? Why is she back? I heard she got divorced. TSK, she must have been dumped by the official. I heard it, but I didn't care. In my past life, these words could make me hide under the covers and cry all night. In this life, these words didn't even have the right to make me frown. I only cared about one thing, whether my hands could still hold a scalpel steady. 3 months later, Professor Zhang let me assist in surgery for the first time. It was an appendectomy, the most basic surgical procedure. He stood at the primary surgeon's position, and I stood opposite him. When he handed me the hemostatic forceps, my hands were surprisingly steady. 5 years without touching surgical instruments, but the feeling was still there. Muscles have memory. Moreover, in the 30 years of my previous life, even though I never performed surgery, I never stopped reading. Gu Beijing didn't know that the things he never cared about, the medical journals under my pillow, the anatomy notes in my drawer, the surgical route maps I drew under the lamp late at night, those were all real. I had never given up, it was just that no one had ever given me a chance. After the surgery, Professor Zhang stood in front of the sink and looked at me. Xia Shiwan, do you know why I've been waiting for you to come back? I shook my head. Because your hands are the most suitable I've ever seen for holding a scalpel. He turned off the faucet and said seriously, the length, flexibility, and stability of your fingers are 1 in 100. In the field of surgery, talent accounts for 30%, effort for 30%, and the remaining 40% is temperament. You have all three. He sighed. I was angry for a whole year when you dropped out. Teacher Zhang, I'm sorry. Don't say sorry. He waved his hand. You're back now, and that's enough. Months later, I passed all the makeup exams. On the transcript, surgery, 98 points, anatomy, 96 points, pathology, 97 points, first in the entire department. When the news spread, no one talked about my divorce anymore. They started discussing something else. A prodigy emerged from the provincial medical school, dropped out for 5 years, returned for half a year, and scored first in the entire department. But I didn't care about these things. What I cared about was that in August 1979, the provincial First People's Hospital published a recruitment notice. The surgery department was hiring 2 resident physicians. Total number of applicants in the province, 147. I was one of them. On the day of the exam, the test venue was set up in the lecture hall of the provincial hospital. I sat in the 3rd row and opened the exam paper. The written test took me an hour and a half to complete. The practical exam involved performing a gallbladder removal on a simulated pig. As I stepped up to the operating table, someone on the examiner panel murmured, "This one looks too young, doesn't seem experienced." I ignored him. I put on my gloves and picked up the scalpel. 26 minutes, a complete cholecystectomy. Blood loss controlled within 30 milliliters. Suture spacing was even, with no unnecessary stitches. The examiner panel fell silent. 3 days later, the admission list was announced. My name was at the top. On the night I received the admission notice, I sat alone on the windowsill of my dormitory, gazing at the night view of the provincial capital. A few lights flickered in the distance, like scattered gold dust on black cloth. I suddenly remembered myself from a past life. At 50, I sat in the courtyard of the military compound, gazing at the stars above, knitting a sweater that would never be finished. That sweater was for Gu Beijing. He had never worn it. I withdrew my gaze and took a deep breath. You have finally moved on. After joining the provincial first hospital, I started from the most basic position as a resident physician, night shifts, writing medical records, managing beds, assisting in surgeries. Other residents complained about the hardship and exhaustion, but I remained silent. In my past life, I endured 30 years of suffering. What was this little bit of fatigue compared to that? My director was Lu Hengxiao, a veteran surgeon in his 50s with a fiery temper who never minced words when scolding others. On the first day of rounds, he threw my medical records down 3 times. What is this nonsense you've written? Rewrite it. The chief complaint is unclear. The history of present illness is a mess. Are you here to be a doctor or to write a novel? If you come to work tomorrow with this level of performance, you don't need to come at all. I worked overtime until 3 in the morning that night and rewrote 12 medical records. The next day, I submitted them. Director Lu glanced through them without saying a word. On the 3rd day during rounds, he took out my medical records and said in front of the entire department, "Look at what Xia Shiwan wrote. This is what a real medical record looks like. You've all studied for 4 or 5 years, yet you're not as good as someone who spent just 1 night revising." The office fell silent for a second, then everyone turned to look at me. Some were shocked, some unconvinced, some envious. I lowered my head, pretending to organize the documents. 3 months later, I performed my first independent surgery as the lead surgeon. It was an emergency, a car accident injury, ruptured spleen, massive hemorrhage. The patient was brought in with blood pressure already dropped to 60/40ths, barely holding on. Director Liu was not in that day, and the other attending physician on duty was hesitant. I stood at the entrance of the operating room, watching the numbers flickering on the monitor. "Let me do it." The attending physician stared at me. "You're just a resident, what are you going to do?" I followed Professor Zhang Henian's splenectomy procedure. I can recite the entire process from memory, and I can do it. "You're insane. He can't wait any longer, in another 10 minutes, he'll be gone." The attending physician looked at the monitor, then at me, and gritted his teeth. "You go ahead, if anything goes wrong, I'll take the blame." Without saying another word, I turned and entered the operating room. "Wash hands, put on the gown, and wear gloves." From making the incision in the abdominal cavity to locating the bleeding point, it took me 4 minutes. Ligation of the splenic artery, splenectomy, irrigation of the abdominal cavity, and layered closure of the abdomen, the entire surgery took 1 hour and 8 minutes. When the patient was wheeled out of the operating room, their blood pressure had already risen to 110/70. In the hallway, the patient's family rushed over and knelt on the ground. "Doctor, thank you for saving his life." I took off my mask, my hands still trembling slightly, not from fear, but the normal reaction after the adrenaline wore off. The next day, the news spread throughout the entire provincial first hospital. Director Liu specifically came to find me. "Director." He looked at me with something in his eyes that I couldn't quite read. "You know, I've been a surgeon for 30 years. The first time I performed a solo operation, my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the hemostat into the patient's abdomen." He paused for a moment. "You're better than I was." When these words came from a hot-tempered old surgeon, they carried significant weight. I wasn't being modest, because I knew I deserved those words. All right, having said that, it's time to talk about Gu Beijing, who was thousands of miles away. In the previous life, after he left, he almost forgot about me. This life was the same. Or rather, he never really cared about this marriage at all. The day I signed the papers, he was at the northwestern border. Political commissar, he delivered the signed agreement to the military unit. It was said that when Gu Beijing took the agreement, he only glanced at it before putting it into the drawer. There was no reaction at all. He didn't even call me. Yes, in his heart, I was never important. I was just an ordinary girl introduced to him when he was 23. We got married because it was time to get married. Not marrying would have looked bad in the eyes of his comrades. As for love or not, he probably never even thought about that question. But Lu Ningqing thought about it. She thought for a long time. She was 5 years younger than me, more beautiful than me, and had a better background than me. Her father, Lu Zhenkuan, was Gu Beijing's former superior, the very one who had just retired. So in her plan, divorce was just the first step. The second step was for her to step in. The military wife would become her, Lu Ningqing. But this step, she had to take gracefully and legitimately. I only caught fragments of these matters before my death in my previous life. In this life, I no longer cared. If she wanted Gu Beijing, let her have him. I didn't want him anymore. But fate just loved to play tricks. In my 8th month at the provincial first hospital, something happened. It was a Saturday. I had just finished a surgery and was eating a boxed lunch in the on-call room. Nurse Xiao Zhang rushed in, her face pale. "Dr. Xia, an emergency case has arrived, a high-ranking officer with a serious condition. Abdominal gunshot wound, penetrating injury, hemorrhagic shock." I put down my chopsticks and stood up. "Where is he?" "He's already been taken to the operating room." But Xiao Zhang's voice trembled. "Director Liu is in the provincial capital for a meeting, and Dr. Wang is away for further training. Today you're the only one in the department who can perform the surgery." "I see." I quickly walked toward the operating room, asking as I went, "What about the patient's information?" Xiao Zhang handed me a form. I glanced at it, then my footsteps stopped. Patient name, Lu Zhenkuan. Gender, male. Age, 62 years old. Identity, retired chief. Note, accidental gun discharge. Lu Zhenkuan, father of Lu Ningqing, Gu Beizheng's old superior. Fate was truly ironic to the extreme. I stood at the entrance of the operating room for 3 seconds. My mind raced rapidly. If I don't save him, no one will say anything. I'm the only one in the department, with limited ability, and the patient's injuries are too severe to treat. This was all too normal in wartime. If I save him, Lu Ningqing's father owes me a life. I pushed open the door to the operating room. This surgery was the hardest I have ever performed in my life. The bullet went through Lu Zhenkuan's right abdomen, piercing the right lobe of the liver and grazing the right renal artery, filling the abdominal cavity with blood. In an era with rudimentary equipment, the mortality rate for such an injury was over 90%. But I did not back down. 30 years of medical experience from my previous life, combined with Professor Zhang's generous teachings in this life, and these hands blessed by talent. 3.5 hours later, Lu Zhenkuan's vital signs stabilized. When I walked out of the operating room, I was drenched in sweat, and my surgical gown was covered in blood. The corridor was packed with people, military uniforms, plain clothes, and a few grim-faced guards. A middle-aged man with glasses rushed over. I recognized him as Minister Liu from the Military Region Health Department. "How did the surgery go?" "It was successful. The bullet was removed, the liver was repaired, and the renal artery anastomosis was completed. Closed monitoring is needed post-surgery, but vital signs are currently stable." My voice was very calm. Minister Liu paused for a moment, then turned to the person behind him and said, "The surgery was a success, the old chief has been saved." A wave of relieved voices erupted in the corridor. Some applauded, some let out a long sigh, and some turned away to wipe away tears. Then, at the very back of the crowd, a figure stepped forward. His military uniform was crisp, his shoulder badges gleaming, his stature tall and upright. I knew his face all too well: sharp, chiseled features, deep-set eyes, and thin lips pressed tightly together. 30-year-old Gu Beizheng was younger than in any memory I had from my past life, and also more unfamiliar. The moment he looked at me, there was shock in his eyes. Obviously, he never expected that the person standing at the entrance of the operating room, covered in blood, who had just saved his old commander's life, was his ex-wife whom he had just divorced. "Xia Shiwan." He called my name with a strange hesitation in his tone. I looked at him, feeling no quickened heartbeat, no heartache or grievance, no urge to cry at the sight of him like I had in my past life. I felt nothing at all, completely empty. "Commander Gu." I nodded politely and turned to leave. Behind me, I could feel his gaze following me, for a long, long time. Lu Zhenkuan recovered well after the surgery. A week later, he was already able to sit up and eat porridge on his own. That day I went on my rounds, and he was leaning against the headboard with someone sitting beside him, Lu Ningqing. She was dressed in casual clothes, her hair tied in a ponytail, peeling an apple for her father. When she saw me come in, the apple peel broke, her hand visibly trembled. "Thank you, doctor." She called me Dr. Xia, no longer calling me Sister Xia. I picked up the medical record folder and began to examine Lu Zhenkuan's drainage tube and wound. Lu Zhenkuan looked at me, his eyes filled with complex emotions. "Dr. Xia, you saved my old life. Lu Zhenkuan will remember this kindness for the rest of my life." "Chief Lu, you're too kind, it was my duty." "No." He shook his head, his voice solemn. "If you hadn't stepped up that day, I would have been gone. I heard from Minister Lu that you performed the surgery alone, 3.5 hours, with no one helping you the entire time." He looked me in the eyes. "Your skills have already surpassed many veteran surgeons who have been in the field for a lifetime." I didn't respond and continued writing the ward round notes. Lu Ningqing sat beside me, her face pale and frightening, her lips moved, but no words came out. This scene was probably something she never dreamed of. She went to great lengths to drive me away from Gu Beijing, thinking I would live a miserable life. But not only did I not fall apart, I ended up becoming the one who saved her father's life. That feeling, just by looking at her face, I could tell how uncomfortable she was. As I turned to leave after the ward round, Lu Ningqing chased after me. "Dr. Xia." She called out to me. There were only the two of us in the hallway. She took a deep breath and then did something I hadn't expected, she bowed. "Thank you for saving my dad." Her voice trembled. I looked down at the top of her head, my heart eerily calm. In my past life, this woman destroyed my marriage and ruined my life. In this life, her father's fate rested in my hands, but I still saved him. Not because of kindness, but because I am a doctor. "You're welcome." After I finished speaking, I turned and walked away. After taking 5 steps, I heard a very faint sob behind me. Lu Ningqing was crying. I didn't know why she was crying, nor did I want to know. Not long after Lu Zhenkuan was discharged from the hospital, a story spread through the military medical circles in the provincial capital. That young female doctor at the first provincial hospital single-handedly performed surgery and saved Chief Lu. I heard she's only 26 years old. Really? A 26-year-old can perform liver repair and renal artery anastomosis. Really, Lu Hengxiao said it himself. He reviewed the surgical records and said the suturing technique was even more impressive than his own. For a time, invitations for consultations increased. The affiliated hospital of the Provincial Medical College, the Military General Hospital, and even several local hospitals outside the provincial capital began requesting me by name. Director Lu was amused. He patted me on the shoulder and said, "Xia Shiwan, you're the most promising one among all the people I've mentored." I said, "Director, please stop patting me, my shoulder hurts." He burst into laughter. Days passed like this, busy, fulfilling, and full of purpose. Until the spring of 1980, a letter arrived at my dormitory. There was no return address on the envelope, but I recognized the handwriting, neat, firm, every stroke carrying the sharp edges of a soldier. Gu Beijing's handwriting. I held the envelope for a few seconds, then opened it. Inside was just a single sheet of paper with a line of words written on it: "I've returned to the provincial capital. Can we meet?" I folded the letter and put it back into the envelope, then opened the drawer and tossed it in along with the other odds and ends. No reply. 3 days later, Gu Beijing appeared at the entrance of the provincial first hospital. When I came out of the inpatient department, he was leaning against the concrete pillar by the entrance. Still in that military uniform, but he had lost a lot of weight. 2 years of border missions had sharpened his facial features even more, and his eye sockets had deepened a bit. When he saw me, he took 2 steps forward. I stood on the steps, holding a surgical plan I had just finished writing. "Commander Gu, is there something you need?" He was choked by my address. After a few seconds of silence, he said, "I want to talk to you." "About what?" "About us." I looked down at my watch. "I have a consultation in 20 minutes, make it quick." Gu Beijing's expression changed. He had probably never been treated like this before. A military district commander, in front of a woman, couldn't even have the time to speak freely. But he endured it. "Xia Shiwan, about that divorce back then, it was arranged by the organization. You don't need to explain, I know. But I signed the agreement voluntarily, you don't need to feel guilty." I interrupted him twice. Each time, his frown deepened a little more. "Xia Shiwan, can you let me finish what I'm saying?" His voice rose a notch. I looked up at him. Gu Beijing at 30 was handsome, commanding, and exuded the aura of a man in power from head to toe. In my past life, just standing in front of him would make my palms sweat, my eyes cast down, and I would be as obedient as a little rabbit. But that was in my past life. "All right, go ahead." He took a deep breath. "About that divorce matter, I looked into it later. It wasn't entirely the organization's decision. Someone tampered with it." My heart skipped half a beat, but there was no change on my face. "Who?" "Lu Ningqing." When he spoke this name, his voice was very low, carrying a suppressed anger. Through her father's connections, she submitted materials to the higher-ups, claiming that our marital relationship would compromise mission security. The political department, unaware of the full story, approved it. I looked at him. "So what?" "So I've already handled this matter. Lu Ningqing has been transferred away from my side and sent to the logistics department." He looked into my eyes. "Xia Shiwan, we can remarry." These 5 words, so light and airy, so like they made me want to laugh. In my past life, I waited 30 years for these 5 words. Waited until my hair turned white, my teeth loosened, my back bent, and my eyes grew dim, until I collapsed in the kitchen. Only after he died did I hear that he had said by my grave, "I owe her." In this life, he casually said, "We can remarry." Was that enough? Gu Beijing, do you think that's enough? "No," I said. His entire body froze. What I said, "No, thank you for telling me the truth." But I looked into his eyes and said, word by word, "I don't want to remarry." His expression turned extremely unpleasant in an instant. "Why?" "Because you have never truly seen me. Because you've been married for 3 years and still don't know what I like to eat, don't know that I have nightmares at night, don't know how many tears I've shed after you left. Because when you put the divorce agreement into the drawer, you couldn't even be bothered to make a phone call to ask me, 'Are you okay?' Because in my past life, I lived for you my entire life, while you never lived a single day for me. But I didn't say a single word of all this, because it's not worth it. There's no reason. I looked down at my watch. Time's up, I have a consultation to attend. As I walked past him, he suddenly reached out and grabbed my wrist. His grip was strong, he was a soldier, with a grip far beyond that of an ordinary person. But I didn't struggle. I just lowered my head to glance at his hand gripping mine, then looked up at him. Let go. 2 words, without a single ripple. Gu Beijing met my gaze. I don't know what he saw in my eyes, but he let go, slowly let go. I turned and walked into the inpatient building. There were no footsteps chasing after me from behind, but I knew that he stood there, rooted to the spot, for a long time. After that day, he came 3 more times. The first time, he waited outside my duty room all night. When I came out, he handed me an insulated lunch box. Your favorite braised pork. I took it, opened it, and took a look. Braised pork belly. He said it was my favorite dish, but he didn't know that I didn't actually like braised pork belly at all. What I really loved was sweet and sour spare ribs. Braised pork belly was what Song Yunhua loved to eat. He couldn't even tell what his own wife and mother liked to eat. I returned the lunch box to him. Thank you, I'm not hungry. The second time, he asked Minister Liu to bring me a letter, 3 pages long, filled with many words about how he would definitely live a good life from now on. I finished reading it. I didn't reply. The third time, Song Yunhua came. She found my dormitory, and her expression was very unpleasant when she entered. Xia Shiwan, what exactly are you making a fuss about? Beijing has already said you can remarry, so why are you still holding out? I sat at the desk, flipping through a foreign medical journal that Professor Zhang had managed to obtain through his connections. Comrade Song, the divorce agreement was requested by your family, and now the remarriage is also your family's demand. You come and go as you please. What am I? A piece of clothing that can be returned at any time after use. Song Yunhua's face turned purple. Besides. I closed the magazine and looked at her. That list of leaving with nothing, you drafted it yourself, didn't you? Her mouth snapped shut. 320 yuan in savings, the sewing machine, the bicycle, the radio, you didn't even spare my dowry mahogany chest. Comrade Song, you've been so ruthless, and now you want me to come back. I stood up, walked to the door, and pulled it open. I have nothing more to say, please leave. Song Yunhua stood there, her chest heaving violently, her face shifting between pale and flushed. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but in the end nothing came out. As she turned to leave, her steps were unsteady. The moment the door closed, I heard her curse in the hallway, ungrateful wretch. I smiled. In her past life, she called me to my face a country bumpkin, a useless thing, and rotten mud that can't be plastered on a wall. The words, ungrateful wretch, were actually the mildest insult she ever hurled at me. On the third day after Song Yunhua left, an unexpected person appeared, Gu Shulan, Gu Beijing's younger sister, my former sister-in-law. In my past life, this woman treated me like a free maid for 30 years. Whenever the family needed something, she came to me. When her son needed money for school, she borrowed from me and never paid it back. I did countless things for her, and she turned around and told others, my sister-in-law is just a simpleton, easy to boss around. In this life, she swaggered into my dormitory without knocking, she pushed the door open and walked straight in. Sister-in-law, no, Xia Shiwan. She looked at me sideways, hands on her hips. You're something else, you know that. My brother came crawling back to beg to remarry, and you still have the nerve to act all high and mighty. I continued flipping through my magazine without even lifting my head. Do you have any idea how much my brother did for you? He even got rid of Lu Ningqing. Do you know who her father is? He's a former senior commander. How many people did my brother offend for your sake? And you're still playing hard to get. The angrier she got, the louder her voice became. I'm telling you, Xia Shiwan, don't be ungrateful. What's my brother's status? A dignified commander of a major military region, countless women would die to marry him. You're just a small-time doctor, what right do you have to be so picky? I turned a page of the magazine. Xia Shiwan, are you listening to me? I'm talking to you. She slammed her hand down on my desk. I finally looked up at her. Are you done? You finish what you have to say and leave, the door is behind you. Gu Shulan was trembling with rage as she pointed a finger at my nose. Do you think being a doctor makes you something special? You're just a woman the Gu family threw away, you'll never get married in this lifetime, no one wants you. If this had been said in my past life, I would probably have reddened my eyes and hidden under the covers, crying until dawn. But in this life, I stood up, walked to the door, and pulled it open. Gu Shulan, in your past life you took from me 12 years worth of cloth coupons, 8 years worth of industrial vouchers, and over 3,600 yuan. I paid for your son's school tuition, and I covered your mother-in-law's hospital bills, you never repaid a single cent. Gu Shulan was stunned, she clearly didn't understand why I said, past life. But that didn't matter. In this life, you won't take anything from me. I looked into her eyes. Get out. She was startled by my gaze, I could tell her pupils contracted and she instinctively took half a step back. Then she forced a snort and turned away. The sound of her high heels tapping on the concrete floor grew fainter and fainter. I closed the door and sat back down at the table. My hands were trembling slightly, it wasn't fear, it was exhilaration. The feeling of finally speaking words that had been pent up for 30 years was so exhilarating. In the autumn of 1980, I encountered a major turning point in my life. Professor Zhang Henian recommended me to participate in a national medical exchange activity, the first national young surgeons clinical skills competition, organized by the Ministry of Health. Outstanding young surgeons recommended from all provinces across the country gathered in Beijing for a week-long theoretical assessment and practical competition. I was the only female physician recommended by my province, and I was also the youngest among all the participants. On the train to Beijing, I sat in the hard-seat carriage, watching the wilderness rapidly recede outside the window. In my previous life, I never left the provincial capital my entire life. In this life, I was going to Beijing. The competition was held at Peking Union Medical College Hospital. I scored second overall in the theory exam and first overall in the practical assessment, first place overall. At the awards ceremony, a leader from the Ministry of Health personally presented me with the certificate. Thunderous applause erupted from the audience. But what caught my attention wasn't the applause, what I noticed was a person sitting in the third row, a military uniform, a general's star, Gu Beizheng. He sat there motionless, staring at me on the stage. The expression was complex, there was shock, pride, and something indescribable, probably regret. I stood straight on the stage, my gaze passing over his head and fixing on the farthest wall. On that wall hung a line of words: heal the wounded, rescue the dying, and practice revolutionary humanitarianism. These 8 words carried far more weight than Gu Beijing's gaze. After the awards ceremony, he intercepted me at the entrance of the auditorium. This time he didn't mention remarrying, he just looked at me, silent for a long time, and then said, "Xia Shiwan, you are amazing." This was the first time he had ever praised me since he got to know me, never happened in the previous life. I nodded. "Thank you." Then I picked up my luggage and left. His voice came from behind, "Xia Shiwan, why have you never told me that you're this outstanding?" I stopped in my tracks, turned around and glanced at him. "You never asked." Gu Beijing's face turned pale in an instant. I turned and walked away, no turning back. After the competition, my name spread throughout the national medical community. The provincial first hospital promoted me to attending physician ahead of schedule, and Director Liu personally led me through a series of high-difficulty surgeries. Professor Zhang began helping me arrange opportunities for training. In those days, slots for studying medicine abroad were extremely rare. But Professor Zhang said, "With your abilities, you deserve that position." In the spring of 1981, I received an invitation letter from Heidelberg University in Germany, cardiac surgery, a 2-year clinical fellowship, fully funded. I held that letter and sat in the dormitory for a long time. Then I made a decision. The day before I set off, I went to the military family compound. It wasn't to find Gu Beijing, it was to visit Sister Xiao. In my past life, Sister Xiao was my only friend in the family compound. She was the wife of the company commander next door, 10 years older than me, cheerful and warm-hearted. On the day I died, it was she who found me collapsed in the kitchen. In this life, I wanted to say goodbye to her. When Sister Xiao saw me, she grabbed my hand. "You're here. I heard you're a doctor at Provincial First Hospital and you got first place nationwide." I smiled and nodded. She looked me up and down, her eyes reddening. "You've lost weight, but you look much more spirited." She took my hand and made me sit down, pouring me a cup of hot water. "After you left, there was no shortage of gossip in this compound. Some said you were pitiful, others said you deserved it. But I told them, this girl won't turn out so badly." She wiped her eyes. "Just as I thought." I held her hand. "Sister Xiao, I'm going abroad, to Germany, to study cardiac surgery." "Going abroad?" She was stunned, then burst into laughter. "Great, that's wonderful. You should go out and see the world. What's the point of staying in this shabby compound?" She laughed and laughed, then started crying. "It's just, what am I going to do when I miss you?" My nose stung with emotion. In my past life, Sister Xiao brought me meals many times when I was at my lowest. Knowing that Song Yunhua wouldn't give me a kind look, she secretly brought over dishes from her own home. "Sister, don't tell anyone." "Okay, I'm not well off either, but I can't just watch you go hungry." This kindness, I would remember for 2 lifetimes. When I walked out of the military compound, I ran into someone else at the main gate. It was Song Yunhua, who was about to enter the compound. She was carrying a bag of groceries, and the moment she saw me, her face immediately darkened. "Why are you here? Didn't you say you weren't coming back?" "I came to see a friend, not to find you." I walked past her. She said behind me, "I heard you're going abroad." I didn't look back. "Good riddance, at least you won't be in here anymore." Her voice was neither too loud nor too soft, just enough for the guards at the door and the military wives passing by to hear. I didn't stop walking, but I heard it, I heard every single word. In my past life, these words would have made my heart ache for days. In this life, screw you. In the summer of 1981, I boarded a plane bound for Germany. It was my first time flying, the clouds outside the window turned, and the sun was blindingly bright at an altitude of 10,000 meters. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes. The last image of her previous life flashed through her mind, the kitchen, a half-peeled potato, and her body collapsing onto the cold floor. Goodbye, never seeing her husband return. Goodbye. 2 years later, I returned to my home country after completing my studies. What I brought back was not only the graduation certificate from Heidelberg University, but also 2 new techniques in the international field of cardiac surgery, valve repair under hypothermic cardiopulmonary bypass and minimally invasive correction of congenital heart disease in infants and young children. At that time, these 2 techniques were virtually non-existent in China. The day I returned to Provincial First Hospital, Director Liu personally came to the airport to pick me up. "Xia Shiwan, you're back." He patted me on the shoulder. "Do you know how hard we've been waiting for you these past 2 years?" I smiled. "Director, could you not pat me on the shoulder this time?" After returning, I immediately threw myself into work. The first domestic low-temperature cardiopulmonary bypass valve repair surgery was performed by me as the lead surgeon at Provincial First Hospital. The surgery was broadcast live to 23 hospitals across the province. The surgery was very successful. After the broadcast ended, applause echoed back simultaneously from all 23 hospitals. That day, the name Xia Shiwan spread from the provincial level to the whole country. What happened later developed even faster than I had anticipated. In 1984, I was specially appointed by the Ministry of Health as an expert consultant in the field of cardiac surgery. In 1985, I led the completion of the first minimally invasive corrective surgery for congenital heart disease in infants in China. In 1986, I presented a paper at the International Conference on Cardiac Surgery and received the highest acclaim from the entire audience. At 32, I became the chief physician, the youngest authority in cardiac surgery nationwide. This was the report card I delivered in the 8th year after my rebirth. In the 8th year of my previous life, what was I doing? By the way, I planted cabbages in the courtyard of the military compound. Did anyone come to ask me to remarry in the meantime? Yes, Gu Beizheng came a few more times. But every time, my answer was the same, no. From his initial pleas to his later silence, and finally, he stood at the door of my office, looking at the certificates and awards hanging on the wall, and said one sentence: "I am not a good husband." This was the most correct thing he had ever said in his life. I said, "I know." He gave a bitter smile. "Do you hate me?" "No hatred. I truly have no hatred. Hating someone is too exhausting. In my past life, I harbored hatred for 30 years, hatred that turned my hair white, bent my back, and ultimately carried me into the coffin. In this life, I have no extra energy left for hatred. Then do I still have a chance?" His voice was very low. This was the most unconfident thing I had ever heard. A dignified commander, in front of a woman, turned into a man at a loss. But I didn't soften, because the 30 years of coldness from my past life couldn't be melted away by a single, "Do I have a chance?" Gu Beizheng. I called his name for the first time. He lifted his head abruptly. "You have your path, and I have mine. That marriage back then was the greatest regret of my life, but now. I looked at the sky outside the window. I have no regrets. He stood there for a long time, then he turned around and walked away. This time, he did not look back. As he walked out of the office, his back was hunched for a moment. I watched that back, feeling an unusual calm in my heart. In my past life, I had watched his departing back for 30 years. In this life, this was the last time. Epilogue. In 1990, Gu Beijing applied to be transferred from the front line back to the rear. I heard he lived alone in the military compound, kept a dog, and every day during his walks, he would stand for a while under the pomegranate tree beside the family quarters. That pomegranate tree was planted the year we got married. Lu Ningqing later married a regiment commander in the logistics department, and her life was neither good nor bad. She never came to see me again. After Song Yunhua grew old, her health had always been poor. Once when she was hospitalized, she happened to be in the provincial first hospital. When the nurse came to ask me for a consultation, I went. I pushed open the door to the ward and saw the white-haired old lady lying on the bed. When she saw me, her lips trembled for a long time. Finally, she said, "Xia Shiwan, you're here. Comrade Song, let me take a look at your scan." I held up her CT scan to the light. From beginning to end, not a single word was mentioned about the past. As I was leaving, she called out to me from behind. She called out, "Xia Shiwan." Back then, I was the one in the wrong. I stood with my back to her, my hand gripping the door handle. "I know." I finished speaking and walked out. The door gently closed behind me. The hallway was quiet. I stood for a few seconds, took a deep breath, and then walked toward the next ward. I still had many patients to see. In 2020, I was 66 years old. At the awards ceremony for the National Lifetime Achievement Award in Cardiac Surgery, I stood on the stage, looking at the dense crowd below. The host read my resume: Professor Xia Shiwan, pioneer of the domestic low-temperature cardiopulmonary bypass valve repair technique, has presided over more than 8,000 cardiac surgeries, trained 42 doctoral students, and published 137 international papers. The applause from the audience was prolonged and unceasing. Standing under the spotlight, I suddenly recalled that winter many years ago, December 16, 1978, a ward of the military hospital, a young woman in a thin cotton-padded jacket signed the divorce papers. She had only 7 yuan and 30 cents in her pocket. She had nothing. But she was afraid of nothing, because she knew in this life, she lived only for herself.